and now has 50 locations along the East Coast. But 2 years ago, they started to branch out into the Midwest, first opening a restaurant in Fargo and then building their new location in Sioux Falls that just opened last week.
Plaza Azteca is all about innovating. We don't like to stay behind on trends. We're always trendy, trying to move up, stay up to date.
From fresh, high-quality ingredients to a focus on service, what makes Plaza Azteca unique, in addition to Sioux Falls, in tonight's Your Money Matters at 10.
Well, when you think of November, you might think of turkey or Thanksgiving, but there's another holiday celebrated at the beginning of the month, Dia de los Muertos, or Day of the Dead. In tonight's Ion Keloland, Renee Ortiz takes us to Sonia Sotomayor to learn more about the holiday in Ion Keloland. Jay?
Sioux Falls, just rain or maybe some thunder showers tonight and tomorrow. Ice storm warning for Aberdeen, Pier, Chamberlain areas.
That's it for us.
Have a great evening.
Tonight, the breaking news, President Joe Biden declaring the election results a good day for democracy, as control of Congress still hangs in the balance. Plus, our new reporting on Republicans blaming Donald Trump for falling short. President Joe Biden and his party breathing a sigh of relief tonight.
Democrats had a strong night. I am so optimistic about the prospects for America.
CBS's Nancy Cordes at the White House. Will the president run for re-election?
Watch me.
Breaking news, Hurricane Nicole barrels towards Florida. Schools, airports closed as the storm gains strength when it could make landfall. CBS's Elise Preston is in the Sunshine State. Skyrocketing turkey prices ahead of Thanksgiving. CBS's Janet Shamlian visits a farm facing more than just inflation.
From farm to table, why your Thanksgiving turkey will cost more.
And Jennifer Aniston opens up, revealing her deeply personal struggles with infertility.
This is the CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell, reporting from the nation's capital.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us on this Wednesday night. Tonight, President Biden is celebrating what he called a strong night for Democrats after his party outperformed expectations in the midterms. The president says Americans sent a clear and unmistakable message last night about democracy and abortion rights. In a rare, wide-ranging press conference late today, President Biden answered questions about working with the GOP despite possible investigations into his son Hunter, whether he'll run for re-election, and even what he thinks of a Trump-DeSantis showdown for the Republican nomination. And at this hour, control of Congress is still up for grabs. CBS News estimates the battle for the House as lean Republican. It could take several days before we know which party will have the majority. And it could be weeks before we know which party will control the Senate, with 3 races still undecided. Plus, it's now official that that Senate race in Georgia, a hotly contested seat, well, it is headed for a runoff. That's in December. We have our team of correspondents covering the ongoing vote count, but CBS's Nancy Cordes is going to start us off from the White House. Good evening, Nancy.
Good evening, Nora. An upbeat President Biden argued that this was the best midterm showing for a first-term Democratic president in 40 years. He called it a validation of his agenda. But tonight, that agenda is still in jeopardy if Republicans do end up clinching the House or the Senate.
Democrats had a strong night.
As President Biden held on to hope, Republican leader Kevin McCarthy plowed ahead with plans for a House takeover, formally announcing his bid for Speaker.
We will be in the majority, and Nancy Pelosi will be in the minority. Yeah!
Republican leader Kevin McCarthy said last night that it is clear we are going to take the House back. Do you think he's probably right about that?
We've lost very few seats for certain. We still have a possibility of keeping the House, but it's going to be close.
Senate control is still unclear, too. Democrats picked up a seat in Pennsylvania where abortion ranked as the #1 issue.
I'm proud of what we ran on. Protecting a woman's right to choose.
It could come down to Georgia, where Republican Herschel Walker is predicting a bruising December runoff against Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock.
And I told you he's going to be tough to beat. He's going to be tough to beat.
History was made at the ballot box last night.
I stand before you tonight, proud to be
Massachusetts elected the nation's first openly lesbian U.S. governor. Wes Moore becomes the first African-American governor elected in Maryland, and just the third in U.S. history. Voters elected the first Gen Z U.S. congressman, a 25-year-old in Florida. And at 40, former White House press secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders will be the youngest U.S. governor when she's sworn in Arkansas.
I know it will be the honor of a lifetime.
The White House released video today of President Biden calling around to Democratic winners.
I'll sleep better knowing you won.
The night did not turn out well for former President Trump, as some of the controversial candidates he endorsed struggled, putting winnable seats at risk. But even a one-seat majority in the House or Senate would give Republicans subpoena power, and they're vowing to launch a range of probes on day one. What's your message to Republicans who are considering investigating your family, and particularly your son Hunter's business dealings?
Lots of luck in your senior year, as my coach used to say. Look, I think the American public wants us to move on and get things done for them.
Exit polling from yesterday's election suggests that 2/3 of American voters do not think that President Biden should run for re-election in 2024. He was asked about that today, Nora. He said that those numbers don't bother him, that he has always intended to run again, but that he may not make a final decision until the new year, even if his predecessor, President Trump, goes ahead with plans to announce his candidacy as soon as next week.
Wow, quite a night. Nancy Cordes, thank you. The eyes of Washington are turning to the West as the uncalled Senate races in Nevada and Arizona will help decide control of Congress. CBS News characterizes the Nevada Senate race as a toss-up. The CBS News race rating for the Arizona Senate race leans Democratic towards Senator Mark Kelly. And let's take a look at the governor's race there between Democrat Katie Hobbs and Republican Kari Lake. That's a toss-up. CBS News' Chris Van Cleve is in Phoenix as the votes are still being tabulated.
Tonight, across Arizona.
Metro area. In those counties, that's Clark and Washoe County. And if you look specifically here in outside Las Vegas, this is an area that Catherine Cortez Masto got a small margin over Adam Laxalt, even though she's trailing overall. We're talking about 150,000 votes that have not yet been counted. Catherine Cortez Masto would have to pick up maybe 55, 56% of those votes. It's doable, not necessarily likely. Hope to get more information in the next couple days.
All right, to the other race we go.
That's right. In Arizona, that's the other big one that we're watching, and we're going to look for more information in the coming days. There, we're talking about more than 500,000 votes that are still outstanding, and a lot of them are in the Phoenix area here and also down in Tucson. Mark Kelly has been leading in these areas, but that is such a large amount of vote. And what's interesting about this is that these are early ballots that actually arrived a little bit on the later side. So it's possible that they could favor the Republicans, but you'd have to see a rather large margin for Blake Masters, like 15+ percentage point margin for him to be able to prevail.
So in the meantime, if Mark Kelly holds on, say, in Arizona, this is a hypothetical, and then Adam Laxalt, the Republican challenger, holds on in Nevada, that would mean this once again all comes down to Georgia in this runoff?
Yep, Georgia, Georgia, Georgia. And right now, as you can see in the results, Herschel Walker down a little bit to Raphael Warnock, but those numbers won't matter. All the voting starts over again in 4 weeks' time.
All right, Rick Klein, our thanks to you. You'll be here until we have the answers, I'm sure. Thank you, Rick. In the meantime tonight, President Trump, the former president, acknowledging today that he had a disappointing night with the candidates he endorsed. Here's ABC's John Carl.
Former President Trump today did something he almost never does. He admitted things didn't go well, saying of the midterms, quote, in certain ways, yesterday's election was somewhat disappointing. But he insisted from my personal standpoint, it was very clearly a big victory, claiming candidates he supported did great.
The numbers have been amazing so far.
In reality, the election was a disaster for Trump. At his election watch party in Mar-a-Lago, he was fuming as many of the most high-profile candidates he endorsed went down.
We want us to get some of the juice.
In Pennsylvania, Trump's chosen Senate candidate lost. So did his pick for governor. Doug Mastriano, one of the many Trump candidates who repeated his lies about the 2020 election.
We didn't win today.
And so did Don Bolduc, the Trump-endorsed Senate candidate in New Hampshire, who kept spreading conspiracy theories about the election right up to his final debate against Democrat Maggie Hassan.
We need to make sure that school buses loaded with people at the polls don't come in and vote.
You're claiming that buses full of voters who are not permitted to vote here, you're claiming that that happens in New Hampshire?
I am claiming that that is what Granite Staters tell me, and I think it's valid. Okay. And I believe in it.
What you just heard from Don Bolduc is his continued attempt to stoke the big lie.
This is a good night!
On the flip side, New Hampshire's Republican Governor Chris Sununu, who has called Trump bleeping crazy, won easily. Georgia re-elected Republican Governor Brian Kemp, who stood up to Trump when Trump questioned Georgia's 2020 election results.
Yeah, that's right.
And then there was Florida's Ron DeSantis, who neither sought nor received Trump's endorsement.
Thank you for a historic landslide victory.
DeSantis didn't need Trump. He won by nearly 20 points without him.
All right, so John Carl back with us here tonight as well. And John, you've learned from your sources tonight that with this potential announcement coming from former President Trump next week, believed to announce that he will run for president again, that there are those close to him and some in Republican circles urging him not to announce now in this time frame when we're waiting for the Georgia runoff.
Trump has teased that it's next Tuesday that he's going to announce his presidential campaign. New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu, a Republican, said that's a terrible idea. And he said, I don't know who's advising him, but they should all be fired. But here's the thing. Some of Trump's top advisors are also telling him that he should hold off and at least not do it before that Georgia runoff.
All right, we'll wait and see, John Carl. Great night last night. Thanks for being here. You're still here today, and that's your determination to get the answers too. Thank you, John. Of course, we'll stay on all of these races as the results come in, and we'll.
Welcome back. A Sioux Falls man made history last night by becoming the first out LGBTQ man ever elected to either chamber of the South Dakota State Legislature. Cameron Nelson will represent District 10 in Central Sioux Falls after being one of the 2 top vote getters in the new district. John Gaskins caught up with Nelson to find out just what that means to him. John.
Andrea, there have been multiple non-straight candidates for South Dakota offices before, but Nelson is the first to win, which he calls humbling. The 32-year-old Rapid City native has spent the last 4 years in Sioux Falls as the fundraising director at LifeScape, which helps children and adults with disabilities and their families. Nelson says good old-fashioned hard work, knocking on doors and connecting with people about the issues earned him the votes.
Well, I never felt like the gay candidate. I was the candidate for District 10, and so all of my conversations were about what the voter needed. You know, being an LGBTQ member of our community doesn't qualify me for office, but what does is that I show up and I care. I'm going to get the work done.
And Nelson made it clear that some of his most important work ahead is giving the gay, lesbian, transgender, and queer community a voice in order to pass bills that will make South Dakota more LGBTQ friendly. Nelson says that includes adoption rights for same-sex couples and workplace protections for LGBTQ plus employees. South Dakota has some of the lowest marks in the country for LGBTQ inclusivity, and he said these laws would ensure that more of the brightest young minds in the state, which includes plenty of LGBTQ people, will want to stay and help the economy thrive here instead of moving to more welcoming places. Andrea?
All right, John, thank you. Roads are getting slick out there, and things are only expected to deteriorate as the evening goes on. Tyler's back with a forecast in just a moment.
A political phenomenon and not as a movement leader. He's a movement leader. The reason people join movements is because they feel alone. They want to belong to something. They need some meaning. They need some hope. They need some help. They need to feel like this is something I can be a part of that's bigger than me. The question isn't, could DeSantis do better with this demographic in the polling? The question is, can DeSantis create a better home for them? Can he create a better sense of belonging for them? And I'm not sure he can. And since it's not clear that he can, I think Trump is hard to quit.
You're describing politics as religion,
yes,
basically.
I am.
And I'm describing politics as purely a vehicle for winning elections.
But that's right.
And honestly, that is one of the most interesting conversations in America, where we have taken politics,
people on both extremes and have turned it into a religion. We've replaced religion in some ways with I think you make a great point. Alyssa, the reason I think it's different is purely the calendar. After January 6th, we were still 4 years away from the next one, and there was no viable alternative. Now, 2024 is on right now.
There were. If we put the effort in, we could have groomed a viable alternative. The party went back to...
But there was no race. Now there's a race.
I got to get a break in. Coming up, we are closing in on a new round of votes from Arizona. We expect to make more House projections as this evening goes on. Right now, a quick break.
Are preparing for a recession.
Employee relations expert Jason Greer says remote workers should be concerned. They may be targets now?
If the only thing I know about you is what I see on the screen, when your name comes up for a potential layoff, you might be the first to be let go.
Greer says this is a great time to try and make yourself stand out at work, build those relationships right now. That might mean coming back into the office voluntarily, because it's much harder to fire someone in person. Nora?
Carter Evans, thank you so much. With just over 2 weeks until Thanksgiving, many Americans have already started shopping for their holiday get-togethers. And while higher prices at the grocery store are expected, it can still leave a foul taste in consumers' mouths. In tonight's Money Watch, CBS's Janet Shamlian traveled to an Indiana turkey farm where she found inflation is not the only reason this year's holiday meal is going to cost you.
These are the last of more than 6,000 turkeys Kyle Becker raised on his rural Indiana farm this year.
So these are broad-breasted white.
Even though he's now charging more for these pasture-raised birds, his earnings will be half of last year.
What are you facing in raising turkeys?
Feed is up, labor's up, processing. Even the boxes that we put the turkeys in have increased in price.
Turkey prices are flying high. The average price of a whole frozen bird is $2.45 a pound, 70 cents higher per pound than in 2021. A combination of inflation and bird flu, which wiped out more than 7 million turkeys nationwide.
How big of a hit has it taken?
Well, turkey production's down about 5% this year over the total year.
Grocers still offer bargain birds to get shoppers in the door, but other essentials are up. Eggs more than 30% from last year, butter more than 26%, and baked goods like pumpkin pie more than 20%. At Ragel's Barbecue in Katy, Texas, there's a bounty of brisket, but Russell Regel says he can't get turkey breasts.
We ordered 200 cases in September and we got about 50, and then we're told that that's all we're going to get for the rest of the year.
How to save if you're willing to wait until the last minute.
Like last year, you know, the day before Thanksgiving, there were some pretty good deals there.
How much does she weigh?
25 pounds.
Okay.
Free-range turkeys like these at Becker Farms do cost more. Father of 5 Kyle Becker works a second job as a veterinarian to make ends meet, as higher costs ruffle feathers for farmers and the rest of us. Janet Shamlian, CBS News, Moreland, Indiana.
Coming up, Russia made a major announcement today about the war in Ukraine. Is it a turning point or a trap? That story when we return.
Into Russia. David.
James Longman back with us again tonight. James, thank you as always. Back here at home tonight, Facebook's parent company Meta revealing staggering layoffs tonight. 11,000 employees, 13% of Facebook's workforce. CEO Mark Zuckerberg sending a letter to workers saying he's sorry and that the decision is one of the hardest calls he's had to make in 18 years running the company. Zuckerberg admitting he overhired as e-commerce surged during the pandemic. We do have one more election note tonight, and this is on abortion rights on the ballot in nearly a half dozen states. And here's what we know so far in some of those states. In Michigan, voters established the right to reproductive freedom, including abortion, in the state constitution. California also approving a ballot measure to codify abortion protection in that state's constitution. And Vermont already had a law assuring abortion rights. Voters have now enshrined reproductive autonomy in their constitution. And in Kentucky, voters said no to a proposal that would have rejected abortion protections in their state constitution. When we come back here on this busy news night, news coming in on WNBA star Brittany Griner. What we've learned tonight, where Russia has now taken her.
He was there at the center of it all. There.
He's there. How can you be sure you're getting the right deal?
Limiting mist is clinically shown to open airways quickly. Get the #1 FDA-approved over-the-counter asthma inhaler and breathe easy again.
Eva McKen in Atlanta, and this is CNN.
New votes continue to be counted in House races across the country. We are updating the vote totals. We have some key race alerts for you right now. In Illinois, former TV meteorologist Democrat Eric Sorensen is currently leading Republican Esther Joy King in this northwestern Illinois district. This is King's second run for the seat. Eric Sorensen has 51.8% to Esther Joy King's 48.2%. In the last few hours, King has gained a few hundred votes on Sorensen. In Washington state, small business owner Democrat Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez is leading Republican Joe Kent. Kent is the Trump-endorsed Republican who defeated Republican Jamie Herrera Butler in the primary. She voted for impeachment. 52.6% to 46.8% in the last few hours. Kent has gained on Gluesenkamp-Perez. In the race for Alaska's lone House seat, we have votes just in. The Democrat Mary Peltola is currently leading former Republican governor and former vice presidential candidate Sarah Palin. That's followed by the third candidate, Republican Nick Begich. Alaska, it's a crowded field, and the state has a ranked choice voting system, so this one could take a few weeks. The House and the Senate still up for grabs tonight.
Saying it could be a trap to lure Ukrainian troops into an attack. Also today, lawyers for WNBA star Brittany Griner say she's been moved to a Russian penal colony to serve her sentence for drug possession. Actress Jennifer Aniston is opening up about her struggles with infertility. That story when we return.
Pizza, so you...
Chapter of my life forever.
And the policy decisions they've made over the last, 4 to 8 years, I think is a very good story.
Technical issues. Correspondent Kelly Beeson is live. So, Kelly, why the delay?
Yeah, well, Nicole, it had to do with the processing of sales. As you mentioned, the record-breaking $2 billion Powerball drawing finally...
All right, there you have some reaction to the midterms. Here's how Politico writes it. Presidents who suffered much more punishing midterms went on to win second terms, so give Biden his due, but it's hard to argue that Democrats overperformed on Tuesday because of Biden rather than in spite of him. And to that point, the Fox News voter analysis, as we look into those numbers, the president's job approval with the people who voted that we talked to, again, this is tens and tens of thousands of people disapprove at 57%. Right track, wrong track, the direction of the country, that question, wrong direction, 75%. And the president said today he wouldn't change anything. Let's bring in our panel. Guy Benson, political editor, townhall.com, host of the Guy Benson Show on Fox News Radio. David Drucker, senior congressional correspondent for the Washington Examiner, and Olivia Beavers, congressional reporter for Politico. All right, 30,000 feet first. Reaction to last night and what's continuing today. Guy, first to you.
Certainly an underperformance and a disappointment for the Republicans based on the expectations that had been set and really building for a number of weeks. As I keep thinking about what actually happened last night, paradoxically, it was a surprising result without many surprising results, if you know what I'm saying. There weren't that many...
It wouldn't last forever, but that's what made it.
Unlisted. Try Boost High Protein with 20 grams.
As much as he, not a shocker, but right. As much as he did.
Right, so I think like the overall result is more surprising than any individual result. And as you dig deeper in, as of right now, this could change in a few different places like Nevada, but as of right now, not a single incumbent senator or governor in the country lost from either party. So this was, despite the numbers that we just put on the screen about President Biden and the state of the country, this was somewhat of a status quo election, even though the opposition party still might win one or both houses of Congress. A lot of strange dissonance about this one.
Yeah, Olivia?
I've been talking to House Republicans all day today. You're seeing one thing that they're saying publicly, which is, they flipped the House, that's what's important. But behind the scenes, they're doing this post-mortem of what went wrong. They were saying, I was feeling the energy of these voters talking about inflation and crime, but maybe abortion was a bigger issue. And they're trying to assess what went wrong with their evaluations because they really did believe that they were going to see a red wave.
Is it possible, David, that close with threat to democracy hit on something that was a better close than we thought it was?
Well, there's always a chance that somebody who gets themselves elected president of the United States knows what they're doing. And we all like to sit in the cheap seats and look at polling and say, Well, that's idiotic. Why is he talking about that? I will tell you, I traveled the country the last 6 weeks. Wisconsin, Ohio, Washington State, Pennsylvania, Nevada, Georgia. I talked to Democrats all over the country, and when I would ask Democrats, what is the issue motivating you? They would talk about kitchen table issues. I cannot tell you how many times Democratic activists knocking on doors and Democratic voters told me, I'm concerned about the state of American democracy. So when you look at the polling, it would make sense that you would talk about inflation and gas prices and how you're going to address Americans' quality of life issues. But when you're looking at a midterm election where you need to turn out your base and, in fact, give your own voters, even if they're not in your base, a reason to show up, if you're President Biden, talking about democracy, at least as a part of the menu of issues you're discussing, makes a whole lot of sense. And I think that it is what Democrats wanted to hear, and it may be why we saw a real robust turnout from Democrats, which you usually don't see from the party in power in the White House that is on its heels in a midterm election. Usually the out party makes a lot of gains because the other side just doesn't show up.
Yeah. Here is President Biden. I want to play it again because it was interesting to see how he was interpreting and what he took from the election and what he's going to do. This is a reporter question and a little different part of his answer.
What in the next 2 years do you intend to do differently to change people's opinion of the direction of the country, particularly as you contemplate a run for president in 2024?
Nothing, because they're just finding out what we're doing. The more they know about what we're doing, the more support there is.
Nothing, Guy? Nothing. I mean, wrong direction, 75%. There's nothing?
Well, and he's saying, well, look, we didn't get shellacked or even close to it, so we'll just keep doing what we're doing. I don't think that's an answer that will play well with a lot of people. This was not an election that was in any way an embrace of the Democrats or trying to empower them further. But also voters did not go running into the open arms of the opposition party in a midterm election in spite of all the fundamentals being as bad as they are or should be for the Democrats. That is, to Mark Thiessen's point on our election coverage last night, really an indictment of the Republican Party right now, where certain types of Republicans, especially governors, did quite well, even much better than expected, but other types of Republicans were ultimately toxic to an awful lot of voters. And they better figure it out because there's another election in 2 years, and I think this was a jarring one for people who were expecting.
We should point out that there is still a possibility that Republicans gain control of both chambers, and there is a path in the Senate. The projection now is, and we don't have this nailed down, but it's roughly 222 seats in the House for Republicans, which is the same majority that Democrats had, which is very slim. Is there a threat to Leader McCarthy, potentially Speaker McCarthy, in this new Congress in that form?
So in the phone calls that I've had, and I've been talking with Freedom Caucus members and people on McCarthy's right wing, they don't think that at the moment there's anyone who's looking to challenge him, but his challenge is in another form. Freedom Caucus is looking for concessions on institutional changes, like restoring the motion to vacate the chair. And I've heard that he's been doing sort of phone calls trying to see how strongly that red line is with these Freedom Caucus members, as well as other sort of concessions that Freedom Caucus is pushing for, like having some of their members on the committee that decide who the chairman is and where people sit on different committees. So
there's a big negotiation going on.
There's negotiations going on behind the scenes. And so that's his biggest sort of threat, is making sure he makes them happy.
You know, we're looking at kind of a ripple, red ripple, but the red wave really did hit in Florida. And Axios writes it this way: Republicans win big in Florida, flipping long Democratic Miami-Dade. Tuesday's election serves as further proof that solidly red Florida is past its days as a swing state. Governor DeSantis won the formerly solid blue Miami-Dade County, becoming the first Republican gubernatorial candidate to win the county since 2002. Today, the former president posted this on Truth Social. Now that the election in Florida is over and everything went quite well, shouldn't it be said that in 2020, I got 1.1 million more votes in Florida than Ron D. got this year, 5.7 million to 4.6 million, just asking.
Sure, okay. Look, I think that when you look at what happened in these midterm elections, a lot of the candidates running for the House and the Senate and for governor that were running in the style of Trump, that pugilistic culture warrior, found themselves coming up short. The Republicans that did well.
Well, the one we don't know about, Carrie Lake in Arizona, that she's still...
Correct. And by the way, there were still plenty of Republicans in the style of Trump that won election that will contribute to the new House majority and possibly the new Senate majority. But I think when you look at Governor Brian, let's look at Georgia, where I just returned from. Governor Brian Kemp wins with 53.5% of the vote. He romped, right? In the same election, in the same contest where same state where President Joe Biden's approval ratings were under 40%, Herschel Walker is battling neck and neck, a point behind in a runoff. He ran as a culture warrior more so than a kitchen table issue oriented candidate, and I think you see what works, what worked last night and what didn't.
Well, we'll see you back in Georgia December 6th. We'll see if it's control of the Senate. Thanks, guys. Finally tonight, a pair of special report salutes. First, we take you to Arizona. They're doing some counting there, but this is more important. An 88-year-old veteran took to the desert skies in a World War II-era plane. The nonprofit Dream Flights, dedicated to honoring seniors and military veterans, sent Teddy DeVries airborne, supported by his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. That's awesome. Next up, 95 Vietnam veterans returned from their trip to Washington to see the memorials and the monuments. These are the honor flights. They recognize their service. Honor Flights San Diego organized the travel at no cost, providing a first-class experience. Upon their return, hundreds of friends, family, strangers gave them a memorable homecoming. Thank you for your service, everybody. Tomorrow on Special Report, we'll see what we could call and what we can't. Thanks for inviting us into your home tonight. That's it for this special report. Fair, balanced, still unafraid, back in Washington. Jesse, over to you.
All right, go get some sleep.
All right.
Thank you. Fox News alert, the Republicans are projected to win the House, meaning Nancy Pelosi will no longer be the Speaker of the House. She'll probably be the Italian ambassador. And if she does stick around, Democrats are coming for her crown. The House margin isn't as big as we expected. Republicans will probably have between a 5 and a 10 seat majority, and Kevin McCarthy will be Speaker. But we'll be facing some serious rebellions. The Senate is still in play. There was no red wave in the Senate. The only way Republicans win the Senate at this point is if they win Nevada, where Republican Adam Laxalt is ahead by about 23.
Mandatory evacuations ordered, the new track tonight. The potential major setback for Russia, ordering a retreat from the key city of Kherson in southern Ukraine, why Kyiv is skeptical. WNBA star Brittany Griner moved to a penal colony in Russia. How the U.S. is responding. Facebook's parent company Meta laying off thousands, why Mark Zuckerberg is slashing jobs on the heels of cuts at Twitter. And those who serve, the veterans, answering a new call in the classroom.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening, everyone. Again tonight from our election headquarters in New York. It was a good day for democracy. President Biden's first public reaction to yesterday's midterm elections, in which Democrats defied the gravity of broad voter dissatisfaction and history itself to avoid massive losses and that widely predicted Republican wave. Let me tell you from the start tonight, much of our reporting this evening is framed by what we don't know, and that is which party will control Congress. At this hour, control of the Senate is still up for grabs, with some races too close to call, while the Georgia Senate contest is headed toward a December runoff election. And the House still in play for both sides, though Republicans currently lead. But there is broad agreement that these were not the results most expected. An unpopular president faced with a bad economy, managing to avoid the fate of his predecessors. The president's message to voters tonight, I get it. Our team has found out again this evening, watching the count and the issues that shape the vote, starting tonight with Kristen Welker at the White House.
24 hours after ballots were cast, tonight control of Congress is still up for grabs. President Biden insisting it was a good night for Democrats.
While the press and the pundits are predicting a giant red wave, it didn't happen.
Republicans who had been hoping to take the House in a red wave, now just looking for a win. The GOP still favored to take over, but with a smaller margin than expected.
We will be in the majority, and Nancy Pelosi will be in the minority.
Much more suspense in the Senate, where Republicans still could gain the one seat they need to take control, but Democrats could hang on too, with NBC News projecting races that are too early to call in Nevada and in Arizona. And in Georgia, the showdown between Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock and Republican Herschel Walker. NBC News now projects will go to a runoff.
We always knew that this race would be close.
I'm like Ricky Bobby. I don't come to lose.
Democrats' biggest win of the night coming in the critical Pennsylvania Senate race. Democrat John Fetterman, 6 months after suffering a stroke, defeating Republican Dr. Mehmet Oz.
We did what we needed to do.
Republicans with big victories too, including Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, easily defeating Democrat Stacey Abrams. And in the biggest win of the night, Florida Republican Governor Ron DeSantis winning re-election in a 19-point landslide, sweeping virtually every county in the state, including heavily Latino Miami-Dade.
We reject woke ideology. We will never, ever surrender to the woke mob. Florida is where woke goes to die.
DeSantis seen as a possible 2024 presidential contender where he could face former President Trump, who had a tough night. His endorsed candidates in Ohio and North Carolina won, but several of Mr. Trump's other handpicked candidates in key races, including New Hampshire, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, all lost. Meanwhile, President Biden was asked what he will do differently, with most Americans saying they're dissatisfied with the state of the country.
Nothing, because they're just finding out what we're doing. The more they know about what we're doing, the more support there is.
And we pressed him about running again.
2/3 of Americans in exit polls say that they don't think you should run for re-election. What is your message to them, and how does that factor into your final decision about whether or not to run for re-election?
It doesn't.
What's your message to them? To those 2/3 of Americans?
Watch me.
Kristen, the president is likely facing divided government. Did he talk about working with Republicans, how that would go?
Well, Lester, he did. The president says he'll call top House Republican Kevin McCarthy tonight and says he's hoping for bipartisanship on issues like Ukraine. The president also saying he'll make his decision on running early next year. Lester.
Kristen Welker at the White House. Thanks. That pivotal Senate race in Georgia, as we said, is neck and neck. Gabe Gutierrez is there. And Gabe, what can we expect in this coming runoff?
Lester, this is what both campaigns and many voters did not want. Another month of campaigning, but incumbent Raphael Warnock and challenger Herschel Walker are already fundraising ahead of the runoff, now set for December 6th. Neither managed to get 50% of the vote, but in the governor's race here, Republican incumbent Brian Kemp easily won re-election over Democrat Stacey Abrams, and that suggests some Republicans may have split their tickets in the Senate contest and voted for Warnock. Now, back in 2020, this state had 2 runoffs that tipped the balance of power in the Senate, and based on ad spending back then, it's possible that we could see upwards of $200 million in TV ads here over the next several weeks. Lester?
Gabe Gutierrez in Atlanta, thanks. Another key state in play, Arizona remains in flux, both in the U.S. Senate race between incumbent Mark Kelly and Republican Blake Masters, and in the governor's race. Vaughn Hilliard is in Phoenix tonight. Vaughn, where do things stand right now?
Yeah, Lester, at least 500,000 votes have yet to be counted here in Arizona, and the soonest we may know who wins this race for governor and Senate may be tomorrow night. Elections officials continue to process and tabulate these mail-in votes, and there's an important batch of votes that are expected to be released tomorrow. These results are going to be mail ballots that were hand-delivered by voters instead of being mailed back. In 2018, these votes, they trended towards Democrats, but in 2020, towards Republicans. Now, one other note that if these margins remain close, this is a situation where if any of these races finish within a 0.5 percentage point, that it would trigger an automatic recount under state law that wouldn't begin until December. Lester?
All right, Vaughn, thanks very much for that. And I want to bring in our political director and moderator of Meet the Press, Chuck Todd. Chuck, Monday night, you and I stood right here, and we talked about whether polarization could be the guiding factor in the election, was it?
Look, I think it was, because I don't know if campaigns mattered. Let me show you Ohio. Tim Ryan ran almost a perfect race for a Democrat in Ohio, and yet it didn't matter how well his campaign went. Look at this. He basically only performed 1.5 percentage points better than Biden. Essentially, the state reverted to its 2020 partisan norm. Let me take you to Colorado, another example, but in the other direction. A Republican running a really good race in Colorado, and it got him all of less than a percentage point better than Donald Trump. The point is, it didn't matter if it was a blue state or a red state. What the partisan makeup was in 2020 seemed to dictate what the result was in 2022.
All right, Chuck, thanks. Let me turn to Andrea Mitchell now, who's been looking at the Biden effect. How much credit does the president get for staving off this red wave?
Well, Lester, President Biden is touting the stronger than expected results, but our exit polls showed more voters believed his policies were hurting the country than helping. So can Biden take credit for Democrats' overperformance? Another one of our exit polls shows President Biden had less of an impact on voters' decisions in this midterms than any other president has had in the last decade. That may explain why, despite the president's low approval ratings, Democrats won in states like Pennsylvania and Michigan and avoided the kind of shellacking President Obama suffered when he lost 63 seats in 2010. This election could be the best midterm performance for any president's party in the last 20 years, Lester.
A lot to analyze, Andrea. Thanks very much. And even though this election is still full of question marks, it's already setting the stage for 2024, especially for former President Trump and his potential rivals. Here's Ali Vitale.
Technically, it's still 2022, but politically,
stay tuned.
It's open season on the 2024 presidential race. Launched to the front of the Republican pack Tuesday night, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis.
Thank you for a historic landslide victory.
Or, as the New York Post front page blared, the future.
We've got so much more to do, and I have only begun to fight.
Supporters in the room chanting for 2 more years. His decisive win here in Florida drawing attention, including from fellow Floridian Donald Trump, who had his once ally turned likely rival top of mind this weekend.
Trump at 71, Ron DeSanctimonious at 10%.
Trump's handpicked candidate suffering a string of losses Tuesday night.
I think if they win, I should get all the credit, and if they lose, I should not be blamed at all.
Who do you think would be the tougher competitor, Ron DeSantis or former President Trump, and how is that factoring into your decision?
It'll be fun watching them take on each other.
But it's not just DeSantis eyeing a potential bid.
Y'all give him a big Georgia welcome.
Former Veep Mike Pence also mulling a run, publishing a book, So Help Me God, out next week. Possibly the same day Trump himself could cement his intentions to run again.
I'm going to be making a very big announcement.
Other former Trump officials like Nikki Haley and Mike Pompeo, Senate allies Ted Cruz and Rick Scott, and governors from Arkansas and South Dakota all talked about as possible 2024 contenders.
And Pence releasing the first excerpt from his memoir tonight, detailing his harrowing experience at the Capitol on January 6th and underscoring his indelible differences with Donald Trump over that day. Lester?
Ali Vitale, thank you. And meanwhile, Florida is bracing once again for a hurricane. Dylan Dreyer is here. Dylan, Hurricane Nicole is gaining steam.
Yes, it is a hurricane now as it moves through the Bahamas and will likely maintain that Category 1 status as it moves to the west. Right now at 12 miles per hour, and we are looking for the chance of about 8 inches of rain across parts of Florida. And this is going to make landfall tonight into early tomorrow morning. And then it's going to race across the state of Florida, perhaps making another landfall as it moves its way towards the Gulf of Mexico, and then it takes this rapid turn to the north. It's going to bring all of this rain up into the northeast, where we could see about 3 to 4 inches of rain. However, it's the storm surge down through Daytona Beach into Jacksonville into Fort Pierce, the 3 to 5 foot storm surge that could lead to more beach erosion and also some significant flooding right along the coastline. The only saving grace, Lester, is that the storm hits during low tide. It's tomorrow morning's high tide that we'll worry about.
All right, Dylan, thanks very much. Let's get the view from the ground. We want to head to Florida. That's where NBC's Sam Brock is watching as things turn for the worse.
Lester, good evening. The size of this storm is massive, just 6 weeks after Ian. And while many people assume Ian did its damage on the west side of Florida, here on the East Coast, it caused all kinds of erosion. Just look at this beach and how it's dwindled, exposing the coastline to a direct hit. Tonight, it's a state of emergency across nearly 50 Florida counties as ocean waters swell from the Space Coast to Daytona Beach.
We watched a huge chunk of this backyard just dissolve and fall into the ocean this morning.
Dramatic images show a public restroom sliding into the ocean in Volusia County, while a couple hours south, the ground literally crumbling beneath a home on Hutchinson Island. As Florida getting slammed by the first November hurricane in almost 40 years.
I just can't believe that we're having a storm in November.
These restaurant owners taking stock of the situation and considering closing down as plywood adorns the Cocoa Beach Pier along with caution tape.
And we boarded up the house and we have our generator.
Moms like Margaret Lever are on the move, but not leaving the storm zone, even after Hurricane Ian delivered some harsh lessons only weeks earlier. Did Hurricane Ian change the mentality for anyone?
A little bit, not too much.
Instead of passengers boarding, airport gates are boarded up, and school districts across the state are closing, even as far south as Miami and Broward.
You know you, and you know your place where you live and where you take refuge.
This historically rare event.
The storms are coming later, storms are coming bigger.
Ready to potentially wreak havoc on a state still in recovery mode. Sam Brock, NBC News, Jensen Beach, Florida.
In 60 seconds, the major retreat ordered by Russia in Ukraine, a troubling new turn for basketball superstar Brittany Griner in Russia, and what Mark Zuckerberg just said about cuts at Facebook's parent company.
More fun, but when it comes to
in 2020.
And Laura, we know that the president acknowledged he doesn't know yet, we don't know yet, whether there will be a Republican majority in either or both houses. But what is the president saying about how that would affect his agenda? What is he saying his agenda will be, especially if there's a divided Congress?
So the president didn't give a lot of specifics about what he may propose, new legislation that he may propose. He talked a lot about the use of his veto pen. He said that he would use his veto pen against any attempts to propose a national abortion ban. He also said he would use it if Republicans tried to undo the laws that we saw him pass in his first 2 years, namely the infrastructure law, prescription drug reform, also elements of the Inflation Reduction Act that had to do with addressing the climate crisis and boosting renewable energy. And the president was also asked, Judy, about Ukraine, and specifically comments by minority leader, the Republican leader, Kevin McCarthy, where he recently said prior to the election that there should not be a blank check in aid for Ukraine, and this was the president's response.
And there's so much at stake. So I would be surprised if Leader McCarthy even has a majority of his Republican colleagues who say they're not going to fund the legitimate defensive needs of Ukraine.
Ultimately, the president said that he hopes that Kevin McCarthy, if he ends up being the speaker, as well as other Republicans, particularly if the Senate ends up in Republican hands, even by one seat, that they will work with him.
Yes, we did hear him say he hopes to be able to work across the aisle. Laura, we know also that a number of Republicans are talking about investigating the president and his administration if they win the majority, especially in the House. They've talked about investigating immigration policy, the withdrawal from Afghanistan last year, and also members of the president's own family, the president himself. How is the White House preparing for what could come?
The president was asked about that today, Judy, and he treated it as though it's comedy. He specifically said that if Republicans try to do that, it's comedic, and he also said that it's out of his control and that ultimately he was going to focus on trying to push forward other agenda items for the American public. But you're right, the White House is preparing. They brought on over the summer a senior lawyer, Dick Sauber. They brought him over from Veterans Affairs in preparation for this onslaught of possible investigations. And they also brought on a new comms spokesperson to handle this as well. One other important thing I just want to note, Judy, is that the president was, again, very optimistic, even though a lot of the races are still, a number of significant races are still left to call. And he said that this was the best midterm election for a first president in the last 40 years.
It certainly did, or appears to be going against trends. We are watching it all as we wait for the final numbers to come in. Laura Barone-Lopez at the White House. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Fox News, everybody would rather talk about Donald Trump because he rates, he sells books. 4,500 English language books about Trump have been published since he took office. I don't know how that compares to Harry Truman or Dwight Eisenhower or Lyndon Johnson or Gerald Ford, but you could probably combine them all.
You absolutely could. I mean, I edit Mediaite.com, and every morning when he says something on Truth Social, not everything, but when he says something like today, for example, he said that, you know, it wasn't, it was a somewhat disappointing day, but then he claimed victory for the wins that he predicted. I knew that if we covered that with the right headline, it would get a lot of traffic, and of course that it did. Now, I mean, this is because Trump is less a politician or a policy guy and more of a self-promoter, sort of media personality, and I think he sort of has broken the mold for others. I mean, I think Carrie Lake is really more of that mold, for example, as a media personality and less someone who's really fluent in policy. I think why DeSantis has done well with the GOP is that he sort of strikes both balances, but absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, again, media loves to promote him because he's good for business, perhaps evidenced by even our talking about him right now.
Fair point. We will not say that we won't chase ratings either. It does happen in this business, something we all enjoy.
Who among us?
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Fair point. I got 30 seconds. I just wanted to get you on this. What do you make of the fact that for all of the hand-wringing, that the election deniers are coming and elections are going to be contested and nobody will concede and on and on and on and on? We just haven't seen it. 22 hours in, the people who have lost have conceded. The people who've won have won. Nobody's threatening lawsuits. Oz in Pennsylvania is not going crazy. Like, this just didn't materialize. Does the certain group of political punditry and anchors owe us all an apology? And you and I talked, all the poll workers that were allegedly going to get shot and killed because of these armed bandits traveling America for election integrity issues and were threats to democracy, didn't do anything either.
It turns out that democracy did not die overnight. So for that, we should all be, and by the way, I think it is a big story. I mean, it's still early. There could be some denialism to come, but no less, I think, than what we've seen since 2020. I think what I would say is that fear-mongering is not a single-party issue. Fear-mongering happens across the aisle. And, you know, when people on the left, which is left-leaning media, fear-monger of the death of democracy, and it doesn't happen, they need to be called out in the same way that they call out, like, the rise of crime or all these other things that the conservative media are alleged to fear-monger. So everyone's over the top, and we should be delighted that there was not political violence. And so far, it seems to have been a really clean and healthy election.
Yeah, I said on Monday night, you always worry about the wrong thing. So as worried as we were about election integrity issues and violence and everything else that we were told to worry about, what really we needed to be worried about was how wrong the polling was, which turned out to be, which you all have covered extensively at Mediaite. Colby,
Exactly
good to see you. Thank you, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
Good predictions also. Coming up, a hurricane in November. Hurricane Nicole. Live pictures right now, Fort Pierce, Florida. The rain coming across horizontally. Live updates as evacuations are starting to be ordered. Plus, live pictures of the White House, how the president says he will work with those that he called threats to democracy.
I don't think we're going to break the fever for the super mega MAGA Republicans.
At Fidelity, your dedicated advisor will help you create a comprehensive wealth plan for your full financial picture with the right balance of risk.
In Democratic circles, I mean, have we lost Florida now to the Republicans? Same thing.
Very slowly losing Florida to the Republicans. And when I see those numbers, blue Miami-Dade, as you can see in that map, Miami-Dade is probably the bluest county in the state. And really, it's the Democrats that have themselves to blame for this.
Well, did the rich liberals who winter in Palm Beach get tricked too? Because DeSantis cleaned up in Palm Beach County, another blue county. DeSantis won Florida by a bigger margin than Gavin Newsom won California, which should really...
Democratic opponent Adam
fresh. Joins me next.
Are made real, where memories are created, where challenges are overcome, and where tomorrow is prepared for. It's where you belong. At Lake Area Technical College, it's not the buildings, classrooms, hallways, equipment, faculty, or technology that makes it a campus. It is you. It's your time to start an epic life.
Wheelchair Dynamics has arrived in Sioux Falls. We have the answer to all your core mobility questions. Come see what we have to offer, including our new fleet of wheelchair accessible vans. These vans have optional features like hand controls, wheelchair restraint systems, and so much more. Ask about our rental vans too. Stop in and discover the confidence that comes with independence. Wheelchair Dynamics, where customer service is second to none.
A 100th birthday is no small feat, but that is what a radio station broadcasting out of Yankton is celebrating today.
KELO's Dan Santella takes a look at how WNAX is marking the occasion. WNAX marked their century today at Piper's Auction and Realty near Worthing.
What's fascinating is the fact that we have been doing the same thing for 100 years that we plan to do for the next 100 years, and that is serve the producers of the upper Midwest.
Today's event is because of 100 years, but WNAX General Manager Bill Holst is focusing on a smaller unit of time.
We like to talk to them every day about what's going on. Are they safe? What are the markets doing? What can they expect in the near future? And that's what we do. We try very hard to make friends of all of our listeners.
WNAX and Piper's Auction and Realty collaborated for an online auction. Proceeds will go to the Tunnels to Towers Foundation, which helps first responders and veterans.
We spend a lot of time with WNAX putting commercials together, and they do a fantastic job with their advertising.
WNAX has a century under their belts, but Holst says it's not really about work.
It's a very humbling experience because we're doing what we all love and what I thoroughly enjoy. It's not work, it's absolutely a mission.
Dan Santella, KELO News. WNAX is found on the AM dial at 570. It covers Iowa, Nebraska, South Dakota, Minnesota, and North Dakota.
I'll stay with us, Jay back with another check on your evening forecast with some big news in the weather department right after the break.
Election, and indicated that he is still waiting to see the results of Arizona and Nevada like everybody else. And when he was asked about whether or not the issue of inflation played as well with Republicans as they imagined, as they hammered Democrats over this issue, instead he pointed to Georgia and he said, we're all waiting for December 6th. Of course, that being the key runoff day in Georgia that potentially could determine the Senate majority or could determine the margin at least. But already the Republicans are making clear his sights set on Georgia next month.
All right, Marty, thanks so much. And Casey, do you think that Kevin McCarthy has the votes as of right now? We don't even know who's going to be in the Congress.
Kevin McCarthy, I don't know how he can know, really. I mean, he sort of has to answer the question that way. I mean, what else are you going to say? But the fact that he's not, they thought he had all kinds of press lined up last night. They thought he was going to be able to come out and, claim victory, and instead he's basically running.
Jake, if body language is a real thing, the body language there was not great for Kevin McCarthy. I mean, you can overstate it, but he didn't come out there like, hey, guys, here I am, the new speaker. He was, he couldn't wait to get through that door and away from the floor.
We got to talk about Mitch McConnell, to Ali Zaslav. He's the king of understatement. I didn't predict a red wave. No, you didn't. You said candidate quality, which is like note this, maybe that. We'll see. Which is note to Donald Trump. Thanks a lot, man, for getting involved in all of these primaries, which we begged you not to, and leaving me with candidates who were not viable in purple or even blue states, like what we're looking at in Pennsylvania. And he's very, very frustrated. This is like Charlie Brown and the football. It is over and over that he's happening. If you go back to 2010, huge wave in the House of Representatives. He doesn't get a majority. Why? Because of candidate quality. And it's happened again and again.
That was because of the Tea Party, though, not because of
but it's a different
Trump, right?
Well, but the Tea Party is a more modern version of Trumpism, right? Or Trumpism is a more modern version.
beginning
of
of
Tea
what
Party. It's
we're
the same kind of thing.
Right.
Jim Jordan, Mark Meadows were the Freedom Caucus chairs, and they were Tea Partiers, and it's sort of the newer version of that.
I think it's interesting, though, that when he was asked about, well, how's it play with voters, he talked about December 6th. You know, look, we can make much too much of this and the tea leaves, but, you know, if he was more confident that he's going to win Arizona and Nevada, then December 6th is not quite so important. It seems like he's saying, well, we're going to win one, we're going to lose another one, and then it'll come down to December 6th and then run off.
They're back to 50.
Yeah, he's assuming that they're going to win, the Republicans are going to win Nevada and lose in Arizona, I think. But, you know, it's also a dig at Rick Scott, who was, frankly, out on the airwaves saying, oh, we're going to win 55 seats in the Senate, which, you know, I think all of us kind of thought, that would be a lot.
No love lost
at the time.
Scott, the head of the National.
But he spent money on races that I'm sure McConnell
and
was a total waste.
Yeah,
Right.
I don't think anybody believes what Rick Scott was selling. It's certainly not Mitch McConnell. But I am fascinated by just, in my mind, I see the image of Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell, and the two men probably could not be more different. And there is a real scenario in which they are sort of co-leading a Congress, you know, for the next couple of years. And they don't see eye to eye on a lot of things. And I think that is actually a different dynamic than we have certainly been experiencing in the last couple of years, but it will be a much more difficult dynamic for Republicans than we talk about, because McConnell is a very results-oriented type of leader. He doesn't want to play some of these games that McCarthy is going to have to play if he wants to play his base. As John Boehner used to say, unless you have the caucus behind you, you're just a guy taking a walk.
Many speakers of the House have tripped up on that very
I was going to say, the difference between McConnell and McCarthy, because McConnell runs the Republican caucus in the Senate, and McCarthy runs the Republican caucus in the House, and that's, relatively speaking, a zoo.
Well, and look, there was also a pretty serious race between McCarthy and McConnell over January 6th. And it's not necessarily one that has gotten a lot of ink. It's not something that the two men really talk about. But the way McCarthy went down to Mar-a-Lago and stood for that photograph immediately after, McConnell was very much of the Liz Cheney mindset. You would learn from these books how seriously he thought about casting a different vote in impeachment. He obviously ultimately closed his mouth in the attempt to win the Senate back in this midterm election, but the two of them don't see eye to eye on how to deal with Trump in the party. McConnell sees him clearly as a loser, and McCarthy sees him as someone that he absolutely needs if he wants to achieve.
Also, remember, McConnell's also been in recent weeks the target and his wife of really unseemly and racist attacks by Trump.
When
to get rid of McConnell.
When McCarthy went down to Mar-a-Lago in January 2021, that is interpreted by a lot of House Republicans as McCarthy bringing Donald Trump back onto a boat after they felt like they had pushed him off. And you could argue that if Kevin McCarthy had not done that last night would have been a much more successful night for Republicans, because you would have had a completely different dynamic. If you buy the argument that McCarthy brought Trump back.
I don't know that I buy that. I mean, I know there are some people who have posited that, but if you think about the way that the party was turning, I mean, McCarthy was following the rest of his party's fate when he went down to Mar-a-Lago. He was not leading from the front with what he did, and he made the calculation that if he wanted to achieve, I mean, he has wanted to be the Speaker of the House for years. He keeps missing out on it for various reasons, because of mistakes he's made, because of the way elections have broken, because of, you know, potentially here Donald Trump. If Donald Trump turns on him in the next couple of months, the speakership race could get really ugly really fast for McCarthy, and he really needs Trump to continue to embrace him to try to mitigate this problem that he has on the right.
John Bolton, Trump's former national security advisor, has said several times he thinks Trump is going to go after McCarthy at some point. God knows why. Just for fun, for kicks.
Because he can.
Because he can.
Why not?
Exactly. Yeah. Why is he insulting DeSantis right now? Anyway, coming up, Massachusetts makes history with its pick for governor. She joins us live next.
Former Vice President Mike Pence joins Jake Tapper for a new CNN town hall. to Talk Democracy, his vision for the Republican Party, and his plans for 2024. Mike Pence, live, next Wednesday at 9.
Mara Lesnar receiving 70% of the vote, and it was a pretty early night for Soon as his race was called first about an hour after polls closed in the Dakota News Now area. Congressman Dusty Johnson will remain in Washington for another 2 years. Johnson receiving a significant amount of support last night, defeating challenger Colin Duprell by a 77-23% margin. Following that dominant night by Republicans in South Dakota, Democrats are reflecting on another disappointing election. State House reporter Austin Goss spoke with party officials today and tells us more here at 6:30.
Once again, Republicans will control every statewide office in South Dakota. From Governor Kristi Noem at the top of the ticket to the down-ballot races, all under GOP control. It's a similar story for South Dakota at the national level, with Senator John Thune and Congressman Dusty Johnson both cruising to re-election victory. In moving forward, the Democratic Party will likely continue to face serious issues. Republicans nearly out-registered Democrats 2-1 in the state, and they lack the infrastructure to recruit candidates or to retain voters in formerly Democratic strongholds, like in northeastern South Dakota.
They have a lot of self-inflicted wounds with respect to record keeping, with respect to filing documents, with respect to recruiting candidates. And this is partly to be expected because they don't build up the ground game, they don't build up the local parties, they don't recruit candidates at local elections, even nonpartisan elections, trying to get candidates to have experience.
Democratic Party Chair Randy Seiler says that they are going to take some time to seriously evaluate all their options moving forward. In Sioux Falls, Austin Goss, Dakota News.
Now let's recap some of the issues decided on yesterday's ballot, beginning with Amendment D. Nearly 40,000 South Dakotans are now eligible for Medicaid. Access will open to residents at or below 138% of the federal poverty level. Next, officials will have to decide on how to implement the program statewide. Well, just 2 years after being approved by voters, South Dakotans apparently had a change of heart regarding recreational marijuana. Initiated Measure 27 was had a 53 to 47 vote. It was rejected last night. Back in 2020, recreational marijuana passed with a 54% of that vote, but it was challenged by Governor Kristi Noem and ultimately constitutional by the South Dakota Supreme Court. Meantime, business will seemingly carry on as usual in Sioux Falls. That's because last night, voters rejected a proposed slaughterhouse ordinance. It would have prevented future meat processing facilities from being built within Sioux Falls city limits. At the center of the issue is the Holstone Farms development set to go up just off of I-229 in Benson in the eastern part of the city. While counting the votes in Minnehaha County was a pretty smooth process last night, there were a few issues, however, at several precincts. Long wait times were a big complaint at several polling locations. Voters reported waiting up to an hour and a half to fill in their ballot. Each voter arriving is checked in one at a time, creating a bottleneck at the poll book table. One of the issues, according to the League of Women Voters, could also stem from some recent changes.
One of the biggest problems we heard was longer lines than usual. And that happens after the redistricting process when groups of voters are moved around based on the redistricting process.
County Auditor Ben Pike says one of the solutions could be adding additional precincts before the next election. A Sioux Falls man making South Dakota history last night by becoming the first out LGBTQ man ever elected to either chamber of the state legislature. Cameron Nelson will represent District 10 in Central Sioux Falls after being one of the top 2 vote getters in the new district. John Gaskin caught up with Nelson to find out what that means to him and the LGBTQ community in the state. John.
Andrea, there have been multiple non-straight candidates for South Dakota offices before, but Nelson is the first to win. And he says good old-fashioned hard work, knocking on doors, and connecting with people about the issues earned him the votes.
Well, I never felt like the gay candidate. I was the candidate for District 10, and so all of my conversations elections were about what the voter needed.
Particularly young voters like Nelson himself. The 32-year-old grew up in Rapid City, graduated from SDSU, spent a lot of his 20s in Minneapolis, and moved back to
Question about, well, why, if they think the economy's not doing well, and I'm sure many of those voters also disapproved of the job the president was doing on the economy, did they still vote for Democrats? And the answer, of course, is there were a lot of other issues that were being decided. Obviously, abortion being one of those, opinions about other issues that were going on in their state. And so while the economy was a driver, even folks who weren't feeling great about it were willing to support the party that's in charge.
When you mentioned the president, we know often midterms are seen as a referendum on the president in office at the time. How did the role of Joe Biden what did that come out?
Well, it was actually what Democrats had wanted to do for many months in this election, was to make it less of a referendum than a choice between President Biden, but also Donald Trump, or maybe MAGA-ism. President Biden would go on the trail a lot, talking about this isn't your father's Republican Party. We're fighting here for the soul of America. You heard a lot about election denialism and protecting democracy on the campaign trail. And what you saw from voters was exactly that. Many of them believed that, yes, while they didn't necessarily approve of Biden, those who somewhat disapproved of Biden still ultimately ended up splitting their vote for Democrats and Republicans. But many of the folks who said, I really like, I want to make this an election about the economy or about Joe Biden, were also cross-pressured because they didn't like what they were seeing on the Republican side. And, you know, the interesting thing, Judy, and once we have all the data back, it'll be fascinating to go through all of it. But it seems to me in these last two midterm elections, the challenge for Republicans has been they have all the baggage of MAGA-ism and Trumpism without Trump on the ballot to help turn out voters who just don't turn out unless Trump is on the ballot. And so it became a choice between the sort of Trump wing and Biden, but without Trump on the ballot, wasn't able to turn out some of those infrequent voters who potentially could have helped Republicans do a little bit better.
So another issue that we had spent time talking about earlier this year, abortion after the Supreme Court decision overturning Roe v. Wade. In the end, how did that factor into what we saw?
Well, we saw 38% of voters saying this was a very important factor, and not surprisingly, 68% of those folks went with the Democrats. So it was pretty clear, as we saw over the summer when we talked about seeing the shift in attention off of just Joe Biden. It wasn't just a referendum on Joe Biden, but it was also about a lot of other things. And when I talked to Democrats this morning, his argument was where Democrats did very well was they were able to link Trumpism, January 6th, and this decision to overturn Roe v. Wade because it was all sort of in the same part, right? This was not just theoretical what it would mean to have Republicans in charge, but it was actually in front of voters all across the country.
So it was preserving, it was all about democracy and about
that's right.
This argument, women's reproductive
that's right.
freedom. Amy Walters, so fascinating to be able to look at what voters were saying, over 100,000 of them.
That's right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we know that last night brought a host of surprises. And
being able to rotate guys, being able to
but ran a smart, tough campaign. You also have to think of John O'Day in Colorado. From Blake Masters to Herschel Walker to Dr. Oz, it is very tough to call them out. My name is Dave Avella is here, chairman of the Republican Political Action Committee called GoPac, focuses on recruiting and training candidates in state legislatures. He joins us now. Always appreciate you coming in. It's good to see you. I think about where we stand right now and these huge differences we see in Ohio between the ticket splitting. New Hampshire is another good example. Georgia is another good example of the ticket splitting. Candidate quality is the only way to describe this and explain this. How much sort of soul-searching and or backbiting is there right now in the Republican Party over these decisions?
every Republican needs to assess their campaigns, and strategists need to look at what we did well and what we did right. Every smart team does that as we now get ready for 2024.
Fair enough, though. But Rick Scott was under a whole lot of pressure before this. He said, no, I got this. We're going to get 54 seats in the Senate or something like that. If Republicans don't take the Senate on his watch, those hundreds of millions of dollars he spent in all his campaign ads and everything else, there's going to be people coming after him with real reasons.
Absolutely. At the same time, a year from now, a lot of this is all DC banter.
Yeah, fair enough.
A year from now, when Kevin McCarthy has a House majority that will be bigger than Nancy Pelosi's majority right now, and Mitch McConnell will use overtime with Herschel Walker to take the Senate, and we're negotiating with the president over the budget, nobody's going to remember this conversation.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I don't know if it says more about you or me. I feel like it says more about me. Fair enough. Where, though, and you are on the front line trying to pick the next Senate candidates, the next House candidates, by getting them involved in politics at the state legislature level. How do you break people of the mold of, I'm going to be the next Donald Trump because I'm going to have the hottest, most obnoxious take on Twitter, or be the most radical because it worked for Trump?
You got to be authentic. Voters see through not being authentic. You can't be Donald Trump. Only Donald Trump can be Donald Trump. And candidates need to think about why it is they're running, what message they're going to communicate to voters, and then hope voters want that message. And what we saw in a number of these races is they ultimately, voters said, we are really unhappy with the president, but we're not ready to vote for the Republican candidate. That's reality.
Yeah, no, that's the exit polling. It shows that for sure.
We have to assess our message. And for all the media consultants that love to run another grainy black ad telling you how bad the Democrat is, perhaps next cycle we look at some ads to tell people what we're for.
All right, this is President Trump on the trail talking about Mehmet Oz.
Dr. Oz has led an enormously successful career on television, and now he's running to save our country just like I do.
Dr. Mehmet Oz, he's a great guy. I've known him well for a long time. He's going to have the easiest time of all in the election itself in November.
Dr. Oz is a man who truly believes in Make America Great Again, or the MAGA movement.
Up until 2022, the past 2 years, President Trump has sort of been the kingmaker and the largest figure in the Republican Party. Is there parts of the Republican Party that are now saying we have to move on from him and we are willing to take the hits in the media and take the hits from his followers to do so?
The fact that there are men and women thinking about running for president tells you that the president will not be given an easy ride to renomination. That's not to say he won't get the renomination. It is interesting, though, in thinking about where both President Biden and President Trump campaigned this year. And you think about what the swing, think about 24 and the swing states. It used to be Ohio, it used to be Florida, it used to be Texas, or they claimed Texas. None of those were competitive, not one.
Well, they worked for the governor races, fair enough.
Or for the Senate race.
Well, Jimmy Vance in Ohio was very good.
We won.
Right? Winning vindicates an awful lot. It's a good place to leave. It's where we left it with Scott Bolton as well. It's good to see you. Welcome to Chicago. Welcome back anytime on the set. Dave Bella, thank you. Live pictures of Florida's East Coast. Yeah, hurricane season is over. Evidently, Hurricane Nicole didn't get the memo how this surprise storm could cause a new level of misery for those still cleaning up from Ian.
Democrats are pushing to, while Democrat candidates refuse to debate. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Kayleigh McEnany is the former White House press secretary and co-host Without Numbers. It did great yesterday. Congratulations.
Thank you.
What happened last night?
What happened was democracy, despite what those will tell you. My favorite lunatic argument for the last is, there was record turnout. Georgia was all at 2018 levels. However, there's still voter suppression if people go hand in hand. No, they can't go hand in hand. Interesting, too, as you probably caught this, Biden, he talked about threats. There are going to be threats out there. Well, as he said in his press conference, the voters, the poll workers, election officials, they if that's what he wants to do. We've got 2022 until December 5th.
You think it's going to be a Trump-DeSantis primary battle?
I hope there's not a battle. I don't think our party could afford a battle. But at the same time, we'll see. We'll see. I trust our guys. Let's put it this way. DeSantis, Trump in a battle. Kamala, Joe, Pete Buttigieg, perhaps a battle. I mean, I'll take our battle, and I think we'll prevail.
And what happens with the Senate? You heard Lindsey. He's still confident he's going to get to 51.
Only going to get to 51 if we stay on message. Every Republican who steps in the state of Georgia, don't step in there unless the only words on your lips are Herschel Walker will stop the Biden agenda. Every Republican needs to be on message. It's got to be unified.
HerschelWalker.com, I heard, is the name of the website.
There you go. I heard that too twice.
Coming up, we send Johnny out to ask New Yorkers what they really think about the midterms.
Pain hits fast, so get relief fast. Only Tylenol Rapid Release Gels have laser-drilled holes. They release medicine fast for fast pain relief.
More than that. They were hoping for six figures, but let me say that there are now about 145,000 mail ballots in Clark County and Washoe County, which is where Reno is, that have yet to be counted. Catherine Cortez Masto, the incumbent Democrat, is 23,000 votes behind Adam Laxalt. Can she make up the ground in that 145,000 mail ballots? Plus, don't forget, Joy, mail can be counted through Saturday so long as it is postmarked by Tuesday or before. So there will be more mail, and so we could get upwards of 150,000, 160,000. It's not clear, and so this is not quite over yet.
And let me ask you this question. Is any of this the counting? Because we know that the new Republican kind of style is not to accept that vote counting after Election Day is inherently legitimate, even though it is. It's just counting votes. Is there any controversy as of now about counting those ballots?
Governor Kemp has had a sort of an arm's length approach to Herschel Walker all along. He said he's going to help him out, but they literally had dueling campaign events on Monday night and on Tuesday night within a very short distance of each other. On Monday night it was within a mile or two. On Tuesday night it was within about 250 feet, and they didn't overlap at all.
Ralph, I'm going to give you the last word here. Realistically, what's the timeline, do you think, to find out? You know, we have Steve Kornacki that's standing at the big board. I don't think they ever let him leave the big board. I think he just lives there now. What do you think is the timeline, realistically, to see how to get all these votes in?
It's a really good question, Joy. As I said, they can count the mail ballots up through Saturday at 5 p.m. And they can actually go until a couple days later to allow people to do what's known as curing their mail ballots, fixing signature mistakes, and then the ballots can count. And then they're going to count the provisional ballots. There's about 5,000 or so of them so far in Clark County by Wednesday, I believe. And then the official canvass of the election is at the end of next week. But Joy, who knows if it's going to be over by then? If it's close enough, one side may ask for a recount. There may be allegations that result in a lawsuit. I just now understand that the stakes here are that Catherine Cortez Masto winning would make Greg Bluestein's life much more boring. So I know that that's the real stakes in this election.
That's how they're going to do the campaign. Make Bluestein's life boring. That's going to be the campaign slogan. I can see it now. John Ralston did copyright it. John Ralston, Greg Bluestein, you guys are great. Thank you very much. Don't go anywhere. My colleagues Rachel Maddow, Chris Hayes, Alex Wagner, Lawrence O'Donnell, and the Kornackster, Steve Kornacki, join me next as our coverage of Decision 2022 continues. Go nowhere. Just get the popcorn and stay around.
Before, back to there at 11 o'clock, and at 7 p.m. will be the 9A title game at Warner and Gregory Square in Montana. You've got to shoot both the teams.
With our unique tub-over-tub process, there's no mess or
For too long.
See? Thank you.
Charging up to 23 per litre more in Bridgeport than other towns and regions, thus preventing West Dorset residents from benefiting from a very unusual
Fund reverse mortgage lender. Call 800-571-81.
Is it about pride that keeps New Yorkers coming back for more?
A lot of New Yorkers are not coming back.
Think of
The political climate feels so daunting in many ways. I wanted to thank you for bringing the message of both of you.
On a call, they can see.
No censure. I know people are disappointed in you, but I'm going to take care of it.
Here at the end of the day. They're kind of okay to sleep Joe Biden. You get text messages and emails from all kinds of people acting like they know you from somewhere. Say, hello, Teresa. It want money. Ain't nobody got time for this.
I do not have time for this. I do not have time for you.
What do you want to tell Jeffrey Water?
Don't know you, but hi.
There's only one name on their holiday list. WeatherTech. Laser measured flow lines that fit perfect.
People in the games and stuff, maybe it's a possibility that's what they wanted to do.
For dry skin, I'm craving.
Spicy seasoning. Want a great gift for your favorite wheel watcher? Go to Shop Wheeler.
The times we live in.
This calls for a toast.
It makes you want to jig about, though, doesn't it? Heavens, we are quite party. Oh, goody goody.
Red carpet here in Nashville in just a few days. You don't want to miss Luke Bryan and Peyton Manning hosting the CMA Awards this Wednesday, November.
Years ago was the last time that happened in Wimbledon. The latest one in the month of November will be the second latest, but still, one in November it has been. We've had 3 hurricanes so far this month. Absolutely amazing. Our continuing coverage of Nicole, though, that is what's top of mind right now. That's what we've been dealing with, and that's what we will continue to deal with. This is our worst squall tonight in terms of the rain. And what's interesting about this one is, I was just commenting, like,
It is just right for my little business. perks too. Unlimited premium data, unlimited...
Zeldin was the best candidate. May not have won, but helped turn 3 House seats red in deeply New York. Thanks, Lee. Yes, Long Island is all Republican now.
Because of you, I'm...
Remain undecided. One's in Georgia, one's in Arizona, and one is in Nevada. The Georgia race is heading to a runoff in December. That could ultimately decide Senate control, depending on what happens in Arizona and Nevada. Now let's take a look at the House of Representatives. 218 seats needed there to control the chamber. Democrats hold 187 seats. Republicans are making gains. They have 207 seats as of right now. 11 short of what they need to reclaim the majority. We have updated that several times this evening. 41 races remain uncalled. President Biden speaking out about the results at a news conference earlier today. He called the election a good day for democracy. He noted with confidence and some relief that the red wave, the red tsunami many Republicans had predicted, did not pan out. All eyes currently on Arizona, though, where we're awaiting a significant number of vote totals, vote counts from Maricopa County, the most populous county in Arizona. That will be reported at any moment. Let's go to CNN senior national correspondent Sarah Seidner, who is in Phoenix for us. Sarah.
Yeah, we are waiting in the next meeting or so. We are expecting to see another vote count come out with more ballots that have been counted. At this point, Senator Mark Kelly is ahead of Blake Masters, and as you know, Blake Masters is backed by Donald Trump. He is a person that does not believe that Donald Trump won the 2020 election. That is an issue with a lot of the Republican candidates in the races that are being watched nationally here. Of course, Donald Trump did lose the 2020 election. Joe Biden won. But that is the scenario that we're seeing here. And I think a lot of people are watching to know and talking to some Republican operatives that they are watching this to see, number one, the influence that Donald Trump may or may not have in races here and across the country. That is significant to them. There is also the issue here of Arizona having more independent or third-party voters than anything else. They have
that was the entire country. Arizona is a single state, which by the way is a fraction of South Florida, which you may have noticed having its votes in less than a day. So to Brazil, the entire country. That seems embarrassing. It's not like a full-blown emergency. Counting the votes isn't some added extra you get for government. They have a surplus, like fighting climate change or bringing equity. Counting the votes is a core function of government.
We still do not know which party will control the United States Senate, nor do we know which party will control the U.S. House. Just the fact that there's even a chance that Democrats could hold the House, it's so ahistorical, it almost doesn't compute. The president's party always gets shellacked in the first midterm after he takes office. The president's party's losses are usually measured in the dozens of seats. That is not what has happened here to Joe Biden's party. He and the Democrats have defied history. This afternoon, a noticeably buoyant President Biden held a press conference. He called yesterday a good day for democracy. Joining us now at the great big board is Steve Kornacki. Steve, am I right that we've just got some new data in from Maricopa County, or was that a promise left unfulfilled?
It is an unfulfilled promise, but it could change any minute. That's why I'm eyeing this right here, because what we're expecting any second now is from Maricopa County, the largest county in the state by far. 60% of all the vote in Arizona comes out of Maricopa County. This is what happens basically around this time every night in the days following the election. They report out big chunks of vote. So what's left to come here in Maricopa County, what we're expecting in the next few minutes, is votes that were basically returned, ballots that were returned Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, right? So basically over the weekend, ballots that were returned over the weekend, plus some ballots that were returned on Monday of this week, okay? They were all brought in. They have not been added into the count yet. This total pool, the weekend ballots plus the Monday ballots, is 136,000 votes. Now, the hope of Democrats and the expectation of Democrats, frankly, is that this pool of votes, and we don't expect that all of this 136,000 is going to be reported out, but we do expect that a significant chunk of it is going to be reported out. The hope of Democrats is that this is a Democratic-friendly batch of votes. They hope that because generally, it's early vote. It came in a few days before the election or a day before the election, and certainly we saw that trend last night in Arizona. If you were watching last night, you saw the big initial reports put Kelly ahead by like 20 points in the Senate race. That was early vote, all getting reported out quickly. And what happened in the overnight hours is they added up all of the same-day vote, and the same-day vote is what brought Masters closer in the Senate race. It's what brought Carrie Lake very close in the governor's race. She's only 3,000 votes behind statewide in the governor's race right now. So Democrats are hoping that this batch of votes, the sort of late arriving early votes, that it favors them and that it gives Kelly a pad in the Senate race, and also that it boosts Hobbs, their candidate, in the governor's race as well. Again, I mentioned that governor's race is close. So we're expecting to get a big chunk of this any minute now. Then, once all of that is added in, the one other major outstanding piece of business in Maricopa County, and this is a biggie, is going to be 275,000 votes that were delivered by voters to the polls on Election Day in person. And this is the wild card, and it may end up being the ultimate wild card, because there's good theories from each party about how to interpret how this vote's going to look. Republicans look at that and they say, well, that vote, the vote that was delivered in person on Election Day in 2020, that was a pro-Trump vote. That's why, if you remember in 2020, as the week went along, Biden's lead got shorter and shorter and shorter, and he ended up winning the state by less than 9,700 votes. That was these ballots being counted up election week 2020. Democrats countered that, hey, in the last midterm election of 2018, it was this same group of votes, the votes delivered on Election Day, that lifted the Democrat Kirsten Sinema to victory in the race for the U.S. Senate. So we had seen this batch of votes behave two different ways in the past two elections. So it looms as sort of the ultimate wild card. But I think what Democrats are hoping here is, on the assumption or the possibility that this is a Republican-friendly group of votes, they see in the votes that you're going to get reported out. We think tonight, we think in the next few minutes, I keep looking over here, they see an opportunity to try to pad Mark Kelly's lead. I'm showing you Maricopa County, but
Steve,
Mark,
yes. I'm just going to tell you that I'm going to give you a second to wait for those votes that you are expecting any minute to come in. What we're going to do is we're going to pause you for a second, if you don't mind. We're going to speak with White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain, and then we're going to come back to you, expecting that those votes are going to be here. Joining us now live is White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain.
Protecting the signature and verifying on every ballot that is returned and submitted. That takes time, especially when we're talking about those ballots going to an election board, a bipartisan board that is reviewing each, and they're looking at a computer screen. This is not an automated process where they're comparing the signature to ensure that it matches what we have on record so that we can verify that voter voted that ballot. So, these things just take time. I think that the thing in Arizona, we've always had these processes, but our elections have become closer over the years, and so I think that it's just that we've noticed it more.
How many more votes still need to be counted in Maricopa County specifically?
From what we're understanding from the county, they have about 400,000 outstanding ballots that they are working through the signature verification process, and then we'll be going through tabulation. They also have their provisional ballots that they're working through. I think we'll get some updates tonight on exactly how many of those they have left. Those have a cure period that is 5 business days following the election. So voters have an opportunity through next Tuesday to verify that their ballot is there.
You just mentioned
or any other thing.
Sorry, forgive me for interrupting. You just mentioned until next Tuesday to verify. Pima County officials say it could be early next week. Do you have a date sort of on the calendar that says we will be done by here, or are we still not certain when we'll have a final number? Maybe we get to 95% of the margins or such that we can say, okay, this person has a big enough lead. You can call the election even though you don't have a final number. But when will you have a final number?
Yeah, so we say results in Arizona are not official until we canvass the election, and that is not happening until the date that's required is November 28th for the county, and then the state canvasses the election on December 5th. So everything we have now is an unofficial result until it's canvassed by the Board of Supervisors in each county and then by the state, and that happens by the Secretary, the Governor, the Attorney General, and the Chief Justice of the Arizona Supreme Court. margins are wide enough that the races are able to be called, then that's, the media makes those decisions.
In the 2020 presidential election, it took several days and some counties a full week to finish counting. If you could, just explain to our viewers why this is taking so much time. I know you did already to a degree, but what happens with the ballots? What are you? First of all, I think people need to understand. Some states like Ohio or Texas, they are allowed to count or at least prepare for tabulation before Election Day. I believe you're not allowed to do that at all until Election Day, right?
No, that's actually not true. So Arizona is able to start tabulating early ballots, as soon as they're received. And so they're able to go through that signature verification process as soon as they're received, and then counties start tabulating. They can't release those results until an hour after polls close. So that's usually that first drop or any ballots that are received before the weekend of the.
Who is on the inside track for a race that's 2 years from now? Last night, fine. It was part of the event, right? Winners and losers. But we need to stay focused on what is done for you, not what the next round of the game is. But I do have a side note. I can't help it. I love the game. DeSanctimonious is the nasty nickname former President Trump gave the Florida governor. I say, too much of a mouthful, DeSanctimonious. You know what he should have called him? Governor DeSanctus. DeSanctus. You know why? The governor has gone holy roller, quoting the Apostle Paul last night. I kept the faith, casting himself as some holy warrior. Remember this, the ad about God choosing him or making him for this purpose? Even Trump limited his preordained place to his own making. He didn't bring in the want of our almighty maker. DeSanctus is what I would have gone. So look, there's a lot going on, but not all of it matters. The key now is to finish counting in the House and see if the GOP has a spread of control that allows McCarthy, if he is the speaker, to be not held hostage by his fringe. If he doesn't have a big margin, he's going to get told what to do. And that's going to be an impossibility of any progress. And then we have the most important race out there, the Georgia Senate. It could determine control of the Senate. You got Raphael Warnock, he's the incumbent, right? But he's also an insurgent. They haven't had a Democrat in the chair for the Senate in that ruby red state in 20 years. And against, of course, Herschel Walker. Football great, not such a great candidate. If he was even close to unblemished as a regular Republican, this would have been a runaway. We would have never focused on him. But as you see, we are in runoff territory, meaning neither of the two candidates has 50% plus one. So to a runoff, it seems we go. How that happens and works and what changes are questions that our first guest can answer. He just won re-election as Secretary of State of Georgia, Brad Raffensperger. Mr. Secretary of State, congratulations. Good to have you.
Thank you, Chris.
Let's do the nuts and bolts and then the prognostication. Who says time for a runoff?
Well, when you don't have 50%, that's when you have a time for a runoff. We looked at it, and that's why we put out our press conference today, that if there's about less than 10,000 votes left, and when someone got 100%, they still wouldn't be over 50%. So that's why we're having a runoff. It'll be on Tuesday, December 6th.
So the amount of votes outstanding are not enough to take somebody over 50. So they will get counted, but it doesn't matter because you're going to runoff, and they don't count for the runoff. There has to be a subsequent election day, which is 4 weeks from now, December 6th, yes?
Yes, top two voters, which happen to be Republican and a Democrat.
So they're the only two who can be on the ballot. This is how Warnock won the last time. So did your other sitting senator, Ossoff, another Democrat. What changes in a runoff versus a regular election?
Well, this runoff is a 4-week period. We started making the ballots this morning, so that's ballot for all 159 counties to get them ready. And then the portal's open for people to request their absentee ballot. And as soon as that ballot's done, we can start sending out the absentee ballots. And then the first day of early voting will be that Saturday, right after following Thanksgiving. We'll have that Saturday. Some counties can do Sunday if that's what they like to do. And then we'll have 5 days of early voting. And then the following Tuesday will be the 6th of December, and that's be election day.
How does the vote stack up to the one we had yesterday? What kind of reduction do you expect?
Well, it's tough to say. I was in a runoff 4 years ago to win my race in the general election. It's just typically lower, and so what we try to do in my race is, get all the Republicans to come out to vote. The other side, try to get all the Democrats out, and I ended up with about 50,000 more votes than he did on election day. But it's really a turnout model to get your people back out.
Not easy. All right, they just had to do it now, and nobody gets any days off. You got to work, you got life, you got all these different things. Now, there is a little bit of an X factor, right? You have about 2.5% going to a third-party libertarian candidate. Now, he's not in the runoff, but those voters, one would suspect libertarian, leave us alone, small government, that would play more to Walker than to Warnock. But what's your experience with whether or not those people come out and vote in a runoff?
Oh, they'll be, a portion of those will be active, just like a portion of the Republicans and the Democrats. And so it's really trying to get your votes any way you can. You're trying to get over 50%. So I'm sure that both candidates will be reaching out and building their support, building some excitement to turn people back out.
One more thing, just to play politics for a second. There are two candidates, Nevada and Arizona, Secretary of State. Both are election deniers. One of them's pretty out there. As a Secretary of State, what would it mean if you get somebody like that in the office that you hold in states that are both pivotal in the last few election cycles?
I think that the role of the Secretary of State is to make sure you have fair and honest elections for everyone. And really, if it's done right, it's not a partisan position when you put on that hat of overseeing the elections. It's just to make sure, you're calling balls and strikes. You're not, trying to game it one way or the other, put your hand on the scales. You just make sure that we have honest and fair elections. And that's what I've done. And that's why I did so well last night, because voters understood that this is an honest person and people are looking for honest politicians up and down the line.
Does it concern you that somebody would come into the office as a denier of the last election?
It concerns me when anyone is. We've been pushing back, going back to Stacey Abrams in 2020, when we had the other side, and we just continue to say that we have honest and fair elections. And when you hold this office, you understand that it's people's priceless franchise to vote.
Yes.
And you never want to get people to doubt that you perhaps would be leaning and putting your own bias into the system. It's not appropriate. We have 159 counties.
Right.
And I know that some of our election directors may be on the left side, the right side, but all of them are walking that line of integrity, and that's what it's about. It's about having integrity.
You got a heavy job. Everybody's going to be looking at you. I look forward to speaking to you as we get closer to the end of the process about how it went, so that you can give assurances to the public if there aren't any problems. I appreciate you, and congratulations, Mr. Secretary of State.
Thank you, Chris.
All right, Brad Raffensperger, won again. Coming up, he's back, and I hope he brought his wallet, because Bill O'Reilly could not cash the checks that his mouth was writing when we made our bet. Look at him there. Look at him. Hang dog, Bill O'Reilly, ready to pay up. Next.
County by 7 points.
Exactly. And good for them for being honest about what happened. Really no lying about it. And again, it wasn't just Ron DeSantis, it was also Marco Rubio. No Republican has won in Miami-Dade County in 20 years. But Ron DeSantis did it, Marco Rubio did it. In the end, DeSantis won by nearly 20 points. Things were so bad for Democrats in Florida that CBS went looking for Charlie Crist supporters and couldn't find any in public. Watch.
By the way, I got to point out that once we started digesting our food and digesting the day, we realized that on that day-long trip, we spoke to dozens of people up and down the coast of Florida, all in precincts, by the way, that voted for President Biden in 2020. But to our surprise, we did not run into a supporter of Ron DeSantis' Democratic opponent. That would be Charlie Crist.
Poor Charlie Crist. But this does mean poor Charlie Crist was the lamest possible candidate the Democrats ever could have run, probably because they knew that DeSantis was going to win. This is one of those rare elections in which voters were, of course, rejecting the other side. But in this election, a lot of those voters appear, and polling shows this, to be affirming the side they voted for. They weren't just voting against, they were voting for. They were voting for Ron DeSantis. Pretty amazing, actually. According to
pretty quick. It's 8:18. We still don't have this vote tally, this release, but as soon as we get it, I'll let you know.
Can I ask you one just clarifying question?
Yeah.
You've explained this. I just want to make sure that I'm getting it because I feel like I'm fuzzy on this.
It seems to me the way that you're describing the outstanding votes, the votes that are still to be counted in Nevada and Arizona, is that in Nevada, they may be more predictable in terms of their partisan cant, whereas in Arizona, it's a little bit more of a jump ball in terms of what the likely partisan character of those votes is. Is that fair?
Well, yeah, the reason is that in Washoe County, you know, where Reno is, they actually gave us a breakout of those votes that arrived on election day.
Okay.
And they actually told you how many of them were by Republicans, how many were by Democrats. And the number who were Republican outnumber the Democrats. And we know that overall in the early vote in Washoe County, there were more Democrats than Republicans who were voting. So it's a reversal from that trend. In Arizona and in Maricopa, we don't know. So it's what we know is that in 2020, that big final batch was Republican, and in 2018, it was Democratic. So there's real suspense around it.
Yes, legit. All right, we've got much more to come tonight. We're going to go back to Steve as soon as we get those new votes in. We're going to go live to Arizona. We've got a lot to get to. This election is still going with all the most important questions still unanswered. Stay with us.
The back stiffness is gone.
I can feel the support right away. This is the relief I've been looking for.
Get ready to take back your back with the inflatable lumbar support, soothing heat, and vibrating massage in the Calming Heat Back Wrap from Sharper Image. It's the wearable, customizable back belt that gives you all three therapies. You can even plug into the optional portable USB power pack and take it anywhere.
It massages my back, it heats my back, and it inflates, so it creates lower lumbar support.
I feel more comfortable while I'm heating.
So whether you're standing up or sitting down, you can go about your day and keep the pain away. And it's guaranteed to make every chair your favorite chair. Order now at CalmingHeatBack.com to get 20% off plus free shipping on your very own Calming Heat Back Wrap from Sharper Image. Go online.
Republican as a conservative, does that frustrate you?
Oh, of course it does. I think it doesn't frustrate me now. It's been frustrating me for the past year. So the quality of the candidate matters. You got to connect with folks. You got to, again, work on their level. What are their issues? What are you connecting with them? And a lot of the stuff they were espousing just weren't things that people were wanted to see anymore in Washington. It wasn't about payback. They wanted to see Washington move forward. And so a lot of these candidates that frankly probably should have won by 5 or 6 points were fighting for their life in close races at the end of the day that probably just didn't need to happen. I'm just a believer that you always have to move the message forward. I think that's very much in the American spirit. We don't settle. We don't just settle on this and say, well, that's good enough. We're always challenging ourselves to make something better, a better policy, a better idea, a better candidate, a better individual, a better public servant. That's what we're all about here, right? And so that's why I am confident. I think most of us constantly want to see things go forward instead of talking about what happened yesterday. So at the end of the day, I'm hopeful we can change the message. I'm hopeful that we can start branding ourselves as a party. I think I do it pretty well. I think a lot of people do it pretty well. I think Governor DeSantis did it incredibly well in Florida. He just knocked the cover off the ball there. And I think people are now saying, okay, we're moving forward. And if you just look at the Trump versus DeSantis stuff today, it's a heck of a lot different than it was just 3 months ago and definitely a year ago. And then you'll have other candidates come into the race, and hopefully they're up to the challenge, taking that leadership role and driving forward with a positive, inspirational message about getting stuff done and demanding accountability out of their public service. You got to get results.
The last time I asked you this question, you said you were focused on yesterday, except it wasn't yesterday at the time, it was the future. You're focused on winning re-election. Okay, you've won re-election. Are you considering running for president in 2024?
Right now I'm not. Look, a lot of people are talking about it. There's no doubt. But once I think the priority, I always want to work on the priorities, and that is what you just brought up, changing the message. Am I going to travel across this country and start hopefully inspiring a younger generation to understand the benefits of good fiscal conservatism, the benefits of being smart about these issues and getting engaged in public service? Absolutely. I love doing it. And that's what I'm going to spend my time doing. As being governor, traveling the country, talking to folks, inspiring them, trying to change that message to be just a small piece of that puzzle, because you have to do it in concert. It can't just be one individual or one candidate or one presidential candidate. It's not about that. It's about all of us in concert being able to move forward and being inspirational for that next generation, because we're not going to be around here forever. We need that B team. We need that next bench to be able to step up and not do it in that angry, polarizing way. That's all they've experienced. For the past 6 years, that's all that generation has experienced. So we have an obligation to change that narrative and drive forward. That's a lot of fun to me, and that's what, if you're talking about my national interest, that's where it lies.
Perhaps a stop in Iowa is in order. Governor Sununu, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Well, you're already in New Hampshire, so you don't need to go there. Thank you so much, and congratulations again. Good to see you again. Still ahead, we're going to go back to Arizona, where new vote tallies are about to be revealed in two of the most closely watched undecided contests in the country. Stay with us.
Good morning, everyone.
It is a big day here at CNN.
There's a lot to get to this morning.
Talk to us about the key issues. Like, what is at the top of everyone's mind?
Do you think it's the messaging I have to ask you?
Well, I always think you have to talk about the economy. What's the number one concern that you're hearing from voters?
By far, pocketbook election. 60% of Americans right now are living paycheck to paycheck.
We're so glad that you chose to wake up with us. CNN This Morning, tomorrow at 6 Eastern.
Nice to unwind for a long week of telling people how Liberty Mutual customized.
That's staggering, Steve. It's staggering. But I understand the legacy of voting Democrat. I understand that. But when it's right before your eyes and you still will not vote for the person who promised to crack down on violent crime, you vote for the other person, it is staggering.
Well, it's about the person making the promise and where they come from and what they've been about. Republicans are not exactly known in high crime areas for having help in these communities. They're used to having Democratic leadership in a lot of these areas.
I think Rudy Giuliani and Mike Bloomberg, but you're overweighting Rudy Giuliani and Mike Bloomberg to disagree with you. True. Because there were two Republican mayors who cracked down on crime and saved literally tens of thousands of African American lives.
Listen, there's no question.
There's
Not always
president for your state.
Not always Democrat, but the state obviously is known to be blue, certainly at the state level. It's got a 3-to-1 registration advantage. And also, black Americans, like everybody else, have sophisticated concerns and layered concerns. You think, what do you care about? You care about your health care. Who's going to fight for their health care? They believe the Democrats, right? They worry about job security.
Yeah, but if there's
Who backs unions? Black Americans are more likely to be in unions than white Americans, Democrats. Who cares about diversity? Democrats. When it comes to policing, who do they see fighting their interests of making sure that use of force is appropriate? Democrats. And then you have
very well.
Lee Zeldin was a Trumper.
Very well, the Democrats in those areas.
But look, Lee Zeldin was not just a Trumper, but a denier of the election. That doesn't
a denier. There you go. Well, the denier thing hurt.
Yeah.
The denier thing is big. I didn't think it was going to be that big, but it is. But getting back to the Democrats and 86% of African Americans voting for them, 71% voted for Ocasio-Cortez. Her district is among the most dangerous in the world. And it's not going to get better. And Ms. Ocasio-Cortez is not going to do anything about it. So
crime is about poverty very often. Crime is about poverty.
Okay.
Helping people with jobs, helping people with the relief they need. Republicans aren't known for catering.
That's right. Republicans want to put violent criminals in prison to protect the people on the street who have to go to the grocery store. Hochul and the Democrats and AOC don't want to do that. They want to depopulate the prisons. So it's staggering. I could see maybe 60-40. African Americans breaking for Dems because of legacy voting, because that's the way post-World War II it's been in this country, and for good reason in many places. Republicans haven't really reached out and convinced African Americans en masse that they're looking out for them. That's absolutely true. But right now is right now. And you're living in a crisis situation in Bedford-Stuyvesant. And the crisis situation is going to get worse, Cuomo.
A lot of those areas see reproductive rights as a crisis also, though. There are a lot of crises. Well, look, it matters.
Reproductive rights.
It matters. People like to have control over their own body.
When there's a grandmother with a bullet between her eyes, it trumps reproductive rights.
I'm not arguing.
Why you don't get it.
I'm not arguing
Look
the
at
order
the
of things. I'm saying it's more than one issue. That's all. I'm saying it's more than one issue. There's no question that crime is disproportionately going to affect lower socioeconomic runs and minorities disproportionately. I just think the idea that they would say crime is bad, let's go for people who've never helped us before. is a little bit of a stretch.
See, here's the problem with you. You want to know the problem with you?
Just one.
You're theoretical. Theoretical. It's always theory.
And what are you?
Chicago,
Mr. Empiricist?
Unbelievable. I'm a problem solver. I don't care about theory. I want to protect poor minority people. They're not being protected in Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, on and on.
And what is your solution?
They are not being protected. Crack down on violent criminals.
That's your big answer that nobody's ever thought of that before.
Hey, yeah, Giuliani thought of it, Bloomberg thought of it, and it worked. Presto.
Why are you only naming Republicans? Which governor in New York State history built the most prisons? Which governor in New York State history built the most prisons?
Your brother.
Nope. Much better man.
No.
My father.
Listen.
So it's not always Republican.
Your father.
Okay. He's dead. Be nice.
Tell you this. I like your father and I like your mother. I can't believe you're actually
There you go.
And she's not gonna do it.
She likes you, Bill.
But I'm gonna tell you, you offer to live in a fog of peace. Okay? We know what works to bring down violent crime. Hochul and Democrats will not.
They screwed up with the cashless bail.
Is not
they screwed up with the cashless bail, and they catered to the left fringe of their party who sees discussing crime as inherently racist. It was a mistake. Judges need to have discretion. They made a mistake. They're going to have to fix it, or they're going to keep paying the price for it. Now, you have another proposition.
They're not going to pay the price for it.
Why?
They should have paid the price for it on Tuesday.
No, you're going to see it with Mayor Adams.
Sheldon, by any measure, would have protected minorities more than Hochul. There's no question. So Hochul and the Democrats got away with it.
The guy's never been charged with anything. How do you know what he did? He has never done anything.
Sheldon,
how do you know?
On day one, because we made a promise on day one, executive order rescinding the no bail. So he had to do it. But it's legislation. Bragg and the others who were enforcement.
It's legislation. You can't just rescind it as a governor. It's a legislation.
Yeah, you can, because as you should know, the governor of New York has extraordinary powers in emergency situations.
Oh, you'd have to do it right.
Declare
call it an emergency. But that's not the right way to lead.
Because it is.
No. You don't like it when the president.
You got to protect people.
I know, but you should do it the right way and get the people who are leaders in those communities to push for legislation and make the rules, and then get.
Yeah, let's have a big meeting. We'll have a big meeting while Emma down the street going to the bodega gets hit in the back of the head with a brick.
Bill,
let's have a meeting.
If you want to deal with crime, you have to deal with policing. You don't police your way out of poverty, okay? And when you see crime, it's
now we're on poverty. I thought we were on crime.
What is it? Not character? Why do you think you have crime when the economy is going down and not the same way when it's going up? I'm not as smart as you.
Because you have drug gangs running these neighborhoods. Drug gangs.
A lot of it is economic. A lot of